as I mentioned, the new law officially takes effect on July 1st, 2015. So you can imagine if we're waiting for rules, which we haven't gotten yet, and much of the law takes effect on July 1st, people are feeling a little bit anxious about that, but I think we'll do okay. There were some things that immediately went into effect in the Rehab Act, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit later. The other pieces to the Act are that it establishes a unified state strategic plan, say that 5 times fast, to ensure integrated services are provided across the core partners that are mentioned in the Act. And that would be the Department of Education, Adult Education, Adult Dislocated Worker and Youth, Wagner-Peiser, and VR. So we think very specifically about the Bureau of Employment Services and the one-stop system, adult education, and the VR programs. So those are the core partners that are mentioned within the Act. Normally, as many of you know, each one of us would draft a state plan that talks about what are our goals, what are we going to be doing with the federal monies that we're getting to provide our services. At least that's how it works in VR every year. And this Act wants us to take a look across all of the workforce systems and Department of Education and see what we're going to do and put that into one plan. The other thing that's interesting is that we've had performance measures. Each one of our systems have had our own performance measures within each of our programs. And WIOA talks about performance measures that are reported across all of our partners. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that in a minute. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's an enhanced focus on employer as a customer and really trying to understand very clearly what the employers in Maine, for example, need to have a trained workforce. There are some additional system coordination requirements in Title IV in the Rehab Act that talks about needing to draft MOUs with our partners at Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Education, and that's also within this Act. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about Section 511, which has some limitations on the use of subminimum wage. So performance measures, WIOA really is trying to increase accountability, and it's placing a stronger emphasis on the results through establishment of some common employment outcome measures, as I mentioned earlier, including the VR program. And those measures are 6 primary indicators of performance for adults served under programs authorized under the Rehab Act, and then 6 primary indicators for youth served under the Rehab Act. Some of those measures include, and this is different for us, at least in the VR program, they want to take a look at program participants who are employed during the second quarter after exit. So for example, in the VR program, we can close somebody successfully in our program once they've been employed for up to 90 days, and then we would close them from our program. And WIOA is going to have us put into place that we'll be checking on the individual the second quarter after they've exited from our program to see if they're still employed, and hopefully they will be, and then we'll be documenting that. And that'll occur for each one of our programs. So, really the emphasis, again, on WIOA, and I think this is one thing that's exciting about it, is they're wanting us to talk and talk about training and education and employment goals for people that are long-term. So that's really what the focus is, much more, I would say, on WIOA. Another measure would be looking at program participants employed during the fourth quarter after exit. So again, that's even further out to see how are people doing once they've exited our programs. We're going to be looking at the median earnings of people who are within all of our programs during the second quarter after exit, as well as we want to recognize many of us have programs where we assist people to get into post-secondary training or secondary school. So when they enter, what do they have for education, and when they exit our programs, hopefully we've seen an increase in what they've been able to get for their level of education. We're also going to look at program participants who during the program year enrolled in an education or training program. So we'll get credit for people who we actually get into training and post-secondary education. And then still to see exactly how this gets measured, but we're going to look at indicators of how effective we're being in serving employers. And that will come out a little bit later once we get the rules, hopefully. One piece in the Rehab Act, which is very different, and one thing I'm going to talk a little bit later is that, which I didn't mention early on, but WIOA has a much stronger focus on working with transition age youth when they're still in school. And one of the pieces of that were some changes around students who come out of schools, some limitations on students not. This new law says we're not going to have students just come out of schools and into employment earning sub-minimum wage. There's some steps that they have to go through before they would be able to do that. And most of those steps are revolved around the VR program, but they need to have received pre-employment transition services, and I'm going to talk about what pre-employment transition services are in a little bit. They need to have applied for and been rejected by VR as ineligible for services. They have to have been provided career counseling and information and referrals to other public programs that allow the experience of competitive integrated employment. They need to have been working toward an employment outcome for a reasonable period of time without success. And for those currently receiving sub-minimum wage, there needs to be a reassessment every 6 months requirements to provide work readiness and job training services. And this is new. This is very new for us. I think it's really exciting. When I was at a national conference lately and many states were talking about it, I would say that there are a lot of states who have a lot further to go with being able to have this come to fruition than Maine, luckily, I'm happy to say, because there are a lot of states who do have folks, kids who come out of schools and maybe go into sub-minimum wage employment. Some other changes that are related to Title IV are that, again, VR to identify and respond to the needs of employers and to help with recruitment and job matching, hiring on the job training, accommodations, and retention. We must have an alignment of employment, training, and education, including career and technical education, with human services programs that are not covered by the Unified State Plan. So I mentioned earlier having very specific memorandums of understanding, for example, with our mental health partners, our intellectual disability and developmental disability partners in DHHS, as well as others. The community colleges are to be engaged as partners in helping us really within the workforce development system with the training pieces, and to promote work-based training and sector strategies, again, to address the needs of multiple employers in the industries. We're going to talk about some of the changes are around systems coordination, as I just mentioned, around formal agreements with the state Medicaid, IDD, and mental health agencies. And the other immediate change that went into effect right when the law was signed is that VR needs to move individuals into a plan for employment within 90 days. In Maine, we have had in our state rules that we had 6 months to develop a plan for employment, and using a comprehensive assessment of rehab needs, take that time to do assessment and move people into a plan. WIOA is saying, and there's actually quite a lot of research out there, that says in order to keep people engaged in these systems, and especially in the VR program, we want you to determine their eligibility and move them into a plan for employment within 90 days to try to really move them through the system. So that's a big shift for us. Also, VR in the state plan has to indicate how our services will be coordinated with the Ticket to Work program, And I think in Maine we're well along that path, so that's a good thing. And also, we have to improve our engagement with the in-demand industry sectors to increase competitive integrated employment opportunities. So, as I mentioned earlier, a big piece of the legislation really is talking about strengthening our connections in transition. And I think that, and many of us in the public VR system are really excited about this because, of course, you know, the earlier you can get to kids with disabilities and talking about employment and having the expectations that they're going to be looking at work throughout the school system, and then having opportunities to engage with employers and get work experience, the absolute better it's going to be for everybody, you know, so we can get them thinking about work early, engaged often, and so I think the pieces of that in this act are really exciting. Having said that, we have some things to work out, because I noticed on the list I have a number of transition VR counselors who are on there, and we're going to be talking about that in the VR program anyway, about what that's going to look like for us on a more specific level. And again, once the rules come out, we'll get some more guidance about what that's going to look like as well. So the other thing is that WIOA actually dovetails fairly nicely with IDEA, which is the Education Act, which was passed for students with disabilities in 2004. And it was written to try to coordinate activities to be designed in a results-oriented process, focused again on improving academic and functional achievement. It facilitates the movement from school to post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment. So what I'm talking to you right now are within IDEA, continuing an adult education, adult services, independent living, or community participation. IDEA or special education includes instruction, related services, community experiences, objectives for employment and post-school adult living, and then, of course, if appropriate, daily living skills and a functional vocational evaluation. And the work that gets done in special education is based on the child's needs or their strengths and preferences and interests. So how does that work then with transition in the VR program? One of the things about this about this act, is that they have talked about the need for the VR programs to set aside 15% of our DVR budget to be used on pre-employment transition services. Currently in the state of Maine, and we actually just ran a recent report on this, in 2014, we actually spent about 35% of our resources on services for transition age youth. We have targeted transition VR counselors who are connected to schools around the state, and we already have quite a lot of our resources, as I mentioned, going to that. The difference in this act is talking about pre-employment transition services, which is just a little bit different. And again, the focus is to try to engage our students early and often, and then also supported employment for youth with disabilities. So WIOA talks about pre-employment transition services, which are defined as providing job exploration counseling, work-based learning experiences, counseling on comprehensive transition or post-secondary education, workplace readiness training, and then instruction in self-advocacy. And all of the VR agencies, I can tell you, around the country are anxiously waiting for the rules to try to spell out a little bit more about how all of the items on that list actually get done. One thing I'm happy to say in Maine is that we've done some excellent work, I think, on many different levels with our education system to try to really dovetail and work within the school systems around, this is the school and this is what they're going to do, and they're going to work with the VR counselor and this is what they're going to do. And WIOA isn't taking away the responsibility of talking about employment from the schools, and it's all going to be VR now, but we're a little bit wondering exactly what that's going to look like once we see the rules. So we're going to talk about a coordination and emphasis on transition, as I mentioned, improving services to our students. We are, as same as for adults, we'll be moving students into a plan sooner to help keep them engaged. And for the transition VR counselors who are on the line, we're going to talk more about what that looks like, what some samples of a plan that would look like when you're working with transition age youth, because as we all know, when we have a 16-year-old talking to us, it's sometimes challenging to say, here's the vocational goal that you're going to sign on to and think that that's what they're going to do for the rest of their life. And that's really not the intent of WIOA. We want to be providing a frequent and consistent message across the state. So the services that we're providing with this school system over here in VR, we want to be providing to all schools. And that's something that we're going to be doing and working on providing a consistent delivery model. And also continue and strengthen the relationship with the Department of Education through joint training and messaging, which I think we have really got a nice start to that with a lot of the work that we've been doing in Maine. So what will the transition work look like in Maine? Staying the same, what we've been doing with our school systems and working with this has been that our transition VR counselors will be assigned to specific schools as they have been. We're going to maintain our strong connections with our high schools. We want our transition VR counselors as much as possible to be attending the IEP meetings with the students in the schools. Obviously, we have a student-centered approach, which we'll continue with, and then support for the transition career exploration workshop and the bridge curricula. And interestingly enough, Libby Stone-Sterling and myself have done a couple of presentations on the use of our TCEW here in Maine, and other states have been grabbing that curriculum because that's a perfect example of a pre-employment transition service. And we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback about that curriculum, both from the students and the schools that have been using it successfully here in Maine, and then other states who have gotten back to us to say, this is a really great way to work nicely within a school system. You have a teacher over here who's maybe providing the curriculum in tandem with a VR counselor, or we're doing train-the-trainer models in many different ways, using the bridge curriculum with agencies and school systems around the state. And that's been a nice way for us to think about some of the pre-employment transition services, and I know we're going to be continuing to provide that. Some of the new things that will look different here in Maine are, obviously, we'll be developing our plans within 90 days. We're going to be doing some increased use of summer youth employment. Again, that's to get at some of the need to do some pre-employment transition services. And of course, there's an awful lot of data out there that shows that the more you can engage students with disabilities early in work experience, real work experience, paid work experience during the summertime, the better off they'll be once they graduate from high school. We're going to have some increased consistency of messaging about what VR services are and what we'll be providing around the state. And we'll be developing some additional tools to share with schools and families. Plans overall for Maine Department of Labor to address WIOA. I want to clarify that mostly what I've talked to you today are probably, I would say, it captures about 25% of what's actually, of everything that's within this act. I have a book here in front of me, and when it first came out, I think it was something like 700 pages long or something. So there's a lot of detailed information within the act itself that speak to changes within adult education and other workforce development systems, and I haven't addressed those here. I've really tried to focus in on some changes that will help individuals with disabilities in Maine. But one thing that we've started here in Maine is a steering committee that's made up of the impacted partners to try, we're using a project plan process to try to really address all of the changes that we see across the workforce development system within Maine. Very active, engaged group, and I think it's going to be some really good work that goes on there. Once we've received the rules, Maine agencies, all of us, will be reviewing them, and we'll have an opportunity to provide feedback. So we'll get the proposed rules out sometime early spring, and we'll do a concerted or a group review, and then provide some input back to the federal government about those rules and how we'll be able to implement them here in Maine. Specifically for DVR, we're going to talk about training with our staff regarding some immediate changes that WIOA is requiring, including time to plan and transition services. And like I said, we're starting that, we've been starting that informally within our meeting structure that we have, and then I'm doing an overview for our staff next week, I think. And then we'll also be utilizing our case management program to track these changes, because of course that's the other piece to this new law. When you have new performance measures and some work that needs to get done, you have to have the data, first of all, what's our starting point, and then how are you going to track the data ongoing. And so those are some challenges that each one of us, all of our agencies, will need to look at, and then we'll need to figure out how we're going to report that out across all of our agencies. The other piece I just wanted to add here was that when I talk to other states, other VR programs, again, I think that Maine is really fortunate that the VR program has been within the Department of Labor for over, gosh, I don't even know how many years now, probably about 14 or 15 years anyway. And so we already are well-placed, I think, to be working with our partners as we move forward. And I think that the Disability Employment Initiative has helped us. We've had that for about 6 years now, to try to do some cross-training and some cross-understanding about services for individuals with disabilities within our career centers and our other partners. So we feel really fortunate in that way. There are some states where VR doesn't even talk to other folks in the workforce development system. So we're really lucky there. So the second to last slide I have is just, of course, change does happen, and what are our next steps? I mentioned a couple of things earlier. The agencies will be evolving and adapting our processes as the WIOA legislation is clarified and we get our rules. We'll be providing feedback to those rules. We'll be tracking the data to help us see what's working and make the changes as we need to. And then, of course, we'll continue to develop information and resources to meet the needs of these changes. So that's our plan. So I've just given you an awful lot of information in a short period of time, and I'm happy to try to answer questions that you may have, and if I can answer them, I will here. It's possible that we might not know the answers until we get the actual rules out.
Thanks very much, Betsy. That's the most interesting overview of WIOA I've heard. I don't know, you made it a little bit more understandable for me. I did want to note that, as you said, summer employment is one of the greatest predictors of post-school success. The research has said that for over 20 years, so I'm thrilled with that piece, and that's exciting. At this point, we only have 2 questions. Actually, Jen Kimball has asked 3 questions. You answered one, what are pre-employment transition services, and then you showed that slide. The next question she asked was, how early is early? At what age can students be engaged?
That's a good question, Jen, and actually that's one that some of us are anxiously awaiting the rules to find out how early is early. Um, Initially, we heard 14, and now there's been a little bit of information that it may be a little bit older than that for the VR programs, but I think all of us agree that engaging students, certainly by age 14, when they're freshmen in high school, is a good thing. The concern on the VR side, of course, is right now we accept applications generally, unless there's an exception, 2 years from graduation from high school. And so when we think about applications starting at age 14, that could really swell our enrollment by a lot. And so one of the things we're looking to the rules to help us with is to state, well, maybe we'll do applications for students. This is all conjecture, and this is what's been talked about, I think, by a number of agencies. So we might not actually get application from age 14, but we can provide some services within the school system within a process called services to groups. And so we're waiting for clarification about that with the rules. And the other piece to that, which we've given feedback, a lot of us, to the federal government about WIOA is, the thing about services to groups is, in my mind, we're talking about preparing students for integrated, competitive employment. So let's start in the school systems and provide services to groups. I don't know about many of you, but I don't know of any student age 14 who couldn't benefit from a career exploration process, whether they have a disability or not. And so is there a way that we can try to provide our curriculum, our services that include a lot of different students in conjunction with the school system, including students with disabilities? And so that's all of the conversations that are happening right now, and we'll hopefully get clarification from the rules.
Another question from Jen Betsy is it possible for summer employment programs to use the transition CEW with the bridge curricula as part of the summer program? Absolutely, and encouraged. Yeah. Yes. And Joe asks what about situations when students have to attend summer school due to academic reasons and forego summer work? Joe, my experience with that is summer school tends to be like mornings only and only for a couple of weeks. I don't think schools do more than a 3-week session for students who are making up credits. Schools can provide up to 6 weeks of extended school year for students with disabilities, and that can be employment services. So it's possible to work around summer school, has been my experience. Betsy?
Yeah, I think that would have to be discussed on a case-by-case basis, but when you're sitting in an IEP and you talk about what's going to happen with a student's summer, is there a way to incorporate something to do with employment in the summer process, whether it's part summer school and then part employment or shadows, job shadows, or attending a TCEW and getting credit for that. One thing we did when we developed the curriculum for the TCEW is it's in 45-minute modules, and it's been accepted to be able to be used within the schools and get credit for it. So maybe that can be worked out. It's going to take some initiative and some planning around that, and some thinking outside the box possibly for some of our students. And I know I can probably hear the anxiety from some of the transition counselors who are out there, and we have some things to figure out for sure, and we don't have all the answers, and we're hoping the rules will give us some more clarity, and then we need to figure out on our end what are the resources that we need in order to make this happen. So, and we don't have that all figured out yet.
Thanks. Jen is typing. Again, folks, if you have questions or comments, anxiety issues, anything, let us know in the chat. I do see that Wendy Warren is on. I don't think Eleanor is on. But if for our regular attendees, Wendy and Eleanor did a presentation on the CEW and bridge curriculums in this very room on a webinar probably about a year ago. And so if that's of interest, if people don't know much about that, that could be a topic that we could repeat next fall if people are interested. Jen, is there any information about work incentives in the transition CEW?
I actually would look at if there's somebody else there who can answer that. I don't know that level of detail in the TCEW, so.
Helen or Wendy, do either of you know? We can unmute the phone if people would prefer to speak. Oh, Helen's typing, okay. In the meantime, while we're waiting on that, Lynn says promoting employment and integration prior to transition would be wonderful. Indeed it would.
Mm-hmm.
Quiet group today, very quiet group.
It's pretty dense stuff.
Yeah.
I've got to say.
I'm not sure if it's in the CEW, but there's a student earned income exclusion that usually protects SSI benefits for students. Yes, that's correct. I think Jen was asking whether or not that kind of information was discussed in the curriculum. So maybe that's something we should look at, and maybe if it's not, figure out how to get at least one module added that would be about work incentives.
Yep. And I think this is, Lisa, I think one of the things recently when the Department of Education sponsored an employment and career planning session, that was one of the questions that came up there too from school systems, was where can we get information on benefits planning and that for students.
Okay. Cheryl. Okay. How does the new career planning waiver fit into this, on the section 21? You need to get
Is this a mic? Yeah, definitely. This is Lisa's third of it, and I think as I listened to Betsy, I too believe that she made sense of WIOA for me, because it is dense, but to see the applications in terms of how it actually will affect and change outcomes for individuals with disabilities is really exciting. And I think in terms of individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities, being better prepared and having experiences in school will assist them to go the avenue of employment upon graduation versus going into community support programs, which is really what the Employment First statute speaks to for those new individuals entering services. And I think it dovetails nicely. The new career planning service could actually be if a student is in their senior year and they are offered either Section 21 or 29 waiver, they actually can access, and we will pay for career planning, so we can be a partner in this also during that period of time at the end of a senior year where they could start the service. So again, that's something new with this new service, that we allow it to occur once somebody is given the waiver. So we see it as, again, another resource that's new and available to people. And it's not just for VR to pay for. It could be something that if somebody does have the waiver in school, that we could pay for under Maine Care.
Thanks, Lisa. Lynn's made shared an example about a movie theater with 80 employees with disabilities. I'm not certain that would meet the definition under WIOA for an integrated setting. Betsy, would you place, I don't believe VR in Maine or VR across the country would be allowed to consider that a successful placement. That's what we call, I think, a social enterprise, a provider-owned business that does not meet the integration requirement.
That's true. Is this movie theater in Maine?
No,
Oh, okay.
it's one that just made national news.
Oh, okay. I guess I missed
There's
that.
a car wash business that's been talked about as well. I'm not going to suggest that those aren't jobs for folks, but they're not integrated businesses that would be allowable placements under our waiver or by VR.
And throughout this entire act, it's so exciting to see integrated employment, obviously, is the goal for all of the employment outcomes, as well as the use of customized employment and a definition of customized employment within the act, which obviously here in Maine we're well down the path of. So that's exciting to see, too.
And Helen has shared, thank you, Helen, that, or no, I'm sorry, it was Wendy, that the SSI work incentive information is not discussed in the curriculum, although they do offer resources for SSI recipients to seek out our benefits specialists. Thanks. I'm going to give folks another minute or two to type in any questions or comments. And then we're going to, Lisa and Betsy and I will attempt to do a brief overview and update about what's going on with Employment First Maine. Okay, Helen asks, will some of you funding via WIOA still be connected to the unemployment rate in different regions? Not sure I understand that. I'm going to turn that over to Betsy.
And I'm not quite sure, Helen, how that's going to work. I guess I'm not sure about the answer to that either. I'd have to check. So that's a good question. I'll check on it. I think that VR is going to be using our funding for summer youth employment. So that is we will be definitely doing that.
So by way of an update on Employment First, the steering committee, as folks may know, meets every other month, and the full coalition meets on those opposite months. Although we get a good crowd at the steering committee meetings as well. The coalition is meeting tomorrow, and we're approving the work plans that have come out of the work groups for their year one objectives and activities. To refresh people's memories, the work groups are data, business engagement, building capacity, communication, transition, policy. I think that's all of them. So that information and the plans, the action plans for each of those groups can be found at employmentfirstmaine.org. I'll type that in a second. I'm going to turn it over to Betsy or Lisa at this point. Lisa.
This is Lisa, and the one thing I think, again, in terms of Employment First Maine, sort of layered on top of that is we have an Office of Disability Employment Policy Technical Assistance grant right now that started December 2nd and goes until September 30th. And within that, we have received support of 5 subject matter experts, and that information's on Employment for Me also. But you'll be seeing things like the development of an Employment First 101 curriculum that will be developed in conjunction and shared in Maine. So be looking for that. We'll be doing a Train the Trainer, hopefully in June. And if you want to come to that, it will be a curriculum that can be used with families and individuals and agencies with school systems, multiple audiences, but basically some information in a consistent manner to share information about when we talk about employment first, what are we talking about, and what outcomes are we looking for. So that's being developed as part of this technical assistance project by Doug Crandall in conjunction with Maine. So that's an exciting project. We also are getting support around our home and community-based transition plan, looking at it from the eye of employment outcomes. And if you have not seen the huge HCBS transition plan, it is online now on our DHHS website. And with it, the report from Dr. Lisa Mills on recommendations that Maine should be thinking about as we implement employment first across our waivers. So there's some really concrete recommendations that have come from her about things that we could do in our waivers to enhance employment. So again, those are posted on the DHHS Office of Aging and Disability website, and be looking for people, as we have 4 years now to implement the transition plan, which essentially helps us to move towards more integrated services in the community, in the implementation of Olmstead, and ensuring that people are in least restrictive environments for home, work, and community. Other projects going on within that, we have some technical assistance available around career planning, some enhanced technical assistance that will start probably in May, June, July, August, September. So we'll be choosing 10 individuals with disabilities who are currently on the waiver and have chosen career planning, and they and their staff will get some on-site technical assistance from Beth Keaton and Nancy Brooks Lane during this late spring, summer, fall, so that we hope by October 1 they'll actually be in some customized jobs. So we are just starting the process of reaching out to those consumers who have chosen the service and asking them if they want this enhanced support for these next 6 months, so that we hope that they're in customized employment by the end. And that project's taking place down in the Portland area. And then we're also getting support around the iSpa waiver and the development of that, which was announced last week by DHHS, and in that employment and, excitingly, potentially benefit counseling. So we're really excited about the support going on around that. And then lastly, we're getting support in that grant to develop consistent job descriptions and expectations for employment specialists and customized employment specialists. And Abby Cooper is going to be working with us and providing free training for agency staff who recruit, hire, and develop those staff positions. So be looking for that. We're just, again, kicking that off, and that will be happening between now and October 1. So those are really exciting projects, all of them free from the Office of Disability Employment Policy to help Maine implement our Employment First law. So again, there's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, and a lot of people involved, so we're really excited about this new technical assistance.
And way too many phone calls.
Way too many phone calls, way too many people, but good stuff.
It is all good. I think maybe the last update on Employment First, I don't see any other questions coming in. Oh, yes, I have one from Helen.
Oh.
The last update, though, on Employment First, the bill to eliminate subminimum wage, the use of subminimum wage in Maine, is the phase-out of subminimum wage. The bill to phase out over the next 3 years the use of subminimum wage in Maine has come out of the...
No, it's been assigned an LR.
Okay, it's been assigned an LR, so it has not yet been
printed. It is posted on Employment First Maine.
Yes, it is.
And it's got an LR, which means it's not quite an LD yet, but it's done and at the revisor's office. And if people aren't thinking about it, I know there are groups getting their testimony ready now. Mm-hmm. So that's, again, we should be seeing that probably in the next couple of months, we hope, coming forward.
Yep.
Transportation.
Helen has a question about the use of Medicaid for transportation to work. This has been the bane of Lisa's existence for some time. I keep hearing different case managers getting different answers regarding whether or not people are able to use Medicaid funding for transportation to work.
So this will be the first time, and hopefully, we've had a little glitch for about the last 4 weeks with the non-emergency transportation and getting back and forth to employment. Last fall, we sponsored Brian Sullivan, who was in charge of and worked for Maine Care and oversaw the transportation waiver, on a webinar. And that webinar was it was captioned. We've shared it. Probably 2,000 people have viewed it. Brian is no longer with Maine Care, and Maine Care is taking a step backwards to think about how the transportation waiver gets used around some situations. What we have asked for is technical assistance and gotten it from Dr. Lisa Mills on our transportation waiver as it relates to employment as part of her ODEP funding. That initial report came in last week. I've shared it initially within ODES. The issue is when people are transported to employment and there is no Maine Care service at the job site. We're finding some bumps in the road when people are completely independent on a site and there is no Maine Care service. So people can utilize work supports, and a staff can drive them to and from work. That's an allowable use of the Maine Care Section 21, 29, 18, or 22. That's not the best solution, but that is still available to people. And case managers just need to continue to advocate for people for transportation, and we are dealing with Maine Care on a systemic issue right now, and we really hope to have an answer by next week. It may take some change in rules. So we will keep you posted as much as we can as we sort of work through this.
Thanks, Lisa. There are no questions about Employment First and updates. I do, for folks that are interested, the employmentfirstmaine.org website is has a wealth of information, meeting minutes for every sub-work groups, meetings over the last year and a half, meeting minutes. Sure. Lots of fabulous stuff there to look at. Julia's going to bring up the website. There you go. Force system to offer, and many of you have requested this over the years, a job coach training before summer that we would combine, that would be 2 days for job coaches and an additional 3 days for employment specialists. The ACRE training that we're offering next week is over-enrolled, and
Yes.
We have a wait list. So we're not meeting the needs right now. We're hoping, again, to have a second course that would combine job coach training, which will be a new certification being offered, as well as employment specialist. The last webinar of the 2014-15 fiscal year is next month, April 9th. David Dubé from Maine Medical Center will be presenting on work incentives, so a timely topic. Think about questions maybe for around the transition age. And Jen, maybe you want to give him a heads up that there might be some questions about transition age youth and the implications. The last DPG, Discovering Personal Genius Career Planning Training, will be happening on May 20th. And so if you haven't yet registered, please do so. The class is about half full already. So get your registrations in. That's what I have. Please share the link to the evaluation. It's right below in Web Links 4. It's the first where it says evaluation. Joe, if you highlight that and then click on Browse To, that will take you to the evaluation. Other questions or comments? Any final words, Betsy?
No, thanks again for having me today. I would say there's more to come on WIOA. This is just the tip of the iceberg here about information, and once we get the proposed rules and the rules themselves in statute, then there will be a lot more information and understanding, really, of how this is going to work in Maine. So I hope I left you with at least the fact that we are excited about the new act and what it'll mean for us. We just have a few things we need to work out. So thank you.
Lots of thanks, great information. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Julia, for always, and I'm not sure, Christina's been here to be introduced. Christina is the new CRP specialist and training coordinator. Did I get that right? For BRS, Bureau of Rehab Services. Kevin Owen typically joined us at these monthly webinars, and Christina is the new Kevin. So welcome. It's great to have you here.